You ever come home after the worst shift of your life, shirt sticking to your back? Headache? Pounding, just craving the one thing that might make it better. Your wife smile only to find her on the porch, face set like stone, holding an eviction notice. That's how I learned the universe has a sense of humor and it ain't always friendly. I barely had time to kiss Diana hello before she thrust that crumpled paper at me and said, her voice icy calm. Bethany called 911. Said all the cop cars meant we were dealing drugs. And when that didn't work, she filed this: police presence violates HOA covenants. So we've got 30 days to get out. Let me tell you, I could smell the pine trees Diana had planted, that garden she'd coaxed back from the dead, right as the bitter stink of pure distilled injustice settled over us. We'd never missed a payment, helped every neighbor in a jam, even fed half the block out of our backyard. 3 years living here, and this is how it's going to end. Diana just stared at me, eyes hard as marbles, and said, "Honey, I think it's time Bethany learned who she's really dealing with." If you've ever tangled with an HOA that thinks it's the Supreme Court, you know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, well, buckle up. Where are you watching from, anyway? Name's Marcus Delqua, and 3 years back I thought I'd hit the suburban jackpot patrol. Officer, beautiful wife, cute little 60s ranch in Willowbrook, where kids still ride bikes without helmets and neighbors wave like they mean it. Yeah, go ahead and call me old-fashioned. Diana and I. We met at a vet's barbecue. She listened like you were the only person in the world. Vanilla perfume mingling with gun oil. First clue. She wasn't your average cop's wife, but when someone looks that good in uniform and slips 20s to homeless vets, you don't ask too many questions. Our house was a wreck when we got it. The previous owners let everything die. But Diana, she's got this stubborn streak, spent months digging in, coaxing that garden back. Now there's basil, tomatoes, bees humming, whole place alive and green. Half the food goes to the local shelter. Her idea, of course. Willowbrook was pure blue collar once. Factory hands, mechanics, folks who fixed their own cars and minded their business. Then came the gentrifiers. That's how Bethany Thornfield rolled in white BMW housekin vanity plate, because Queen would have been too subtle. She's a real estate agent who thinks, how was your weekend is an opening to inspect your roof. Within a month, she was HOA president of a neighborhood that never needed one. This place has so much potential, she'd say, staring at our house like we'd offended her ancestors. At first, it was small stuff. Measuring our grass with an actual ruler. No joke, I watched her crouched in our yard, metal ruler in hand, like some deranged golf caddy. Diana just laughed, said, "Small people need to feel big." Then came the emergency HOA meeting. Suddenly we had parking bans, lawn ornament rules, visual harmony standards. My patrol car, Diana's unmarked sedan, out. Against neighborhood aesthetics. I started parking 2 blocks away, slogging through rain that soaked my uniform. Diana watched me, shaking her head. Pick your battles, honey. But Bethany wasn't done. She filed noise complaints about my weekend woodworking beds and dressers for the homeless shelter. Apparently the sound of my saw violated her quiet enjoyment. Ever loaded up your tools knowing you might never bring them home again? Mrs. Patterson, our 83-year-old neighbor, watched me with tears in her eyes. That woman's got no soul, Marcus. Your daddy would be proud. But here's the kicker. While I bent over backward to keep the peace, Diana was making phone calls. She'd hang up fast when I walked in. Texts from people with military titles that didn't make sense for a tiny police department. Work coordination, she'd say, with that razor-sharp tone I'd only heard when she talked about Afghanistan or why she left the army. 3 months in, I was ready to move somewhere that made sense, somewhere neighbors weren't, amateur prosecutors with personality disorders. What I didn't know, Diana was quietly building a case file to make Bethany regret ever setting foot in Willowbrook. The next twist came in the form of Bethany's secret weapon, her brother-in-law Randall, Kowalski County Code Enforcement. This guy looked like he'd lost a fight with a mop. Clipboard attitude, swagger of a man who peaked in high school. Ma'am, unapproved landscaping modifications, he declared, squinting at Diana's garden like it was growing illegal weapons. Diana, still in her work clothes, stepped out, smelling of soap and quiet authority. What modifications, she asked. Garden's got to be 15 feet from the line. Yours is 12. Randall pulled out a tape measure like it was the sword in the stone. My coffee went cold as I watched him threaten months of Diana's work food for 20 families at the shelter. But Diana just smiled, cracked her knuckles. I've seen that twice before, both times before someone learned a pricey lesson and asked, "You familiar with municipal food security exemption ordinances?" He blinked. "What's that?" Diana explained. "Most cities exempt vegetable gardens serving food banks from the setback rules." Randall's pen froze midair. 20 minutes later, he slunk off muttering about checking codes. But you know folks like Bethany, they never quit. Just double down. That night, I couldn't shake Randall's attitude, so I filed a records request for his citations. 3 days later, the numbers dropped in my lap, and my hands shook with rage. 247 citations. In 12 months, 219 of them in Willowbrook. For a county with 50,000 people, that wasn't enforcement, that was a witch hunt. "Diana, you need to see this," I said, laying out printouts across the kitchen. She studied them like a general before a battle. Classic harassment campaign. We document everything. Let them dig their own graves. A few days later, Bethany held an emergency HOA meeting packed with elderly retirees. She'd convinced property values would skyrocket if only we got rid of the problem elements. The room smelled of burnt coffee, industrial carpet cleaner, and nervous sweat. She got up and proposed a $500 monthly enhancement fee to fund improvements, of course. The place exploded. Mrs. Patterson struggled up, voice trembling with fury. $500? I live on Social Security, you heartless creature, trying to starve us out. Diana stood up. The room went dead silent for about 3 seconds before Bethany bulldozed on. "We're partnering with Premier Community Solutions for Professional Enforcement," which sounded like a protection racket in business casual. 5 days later, our mailbox looked like a paper mill exploded. Daily violation notices, petty stuff, mailbox too close to the sidewalk. Welcome, Matt, the wrong color house numbers, not visually harmonious. Each demanded fees stamped with Premier's corporate logo. Bethany got greedy, real greedy. And greedy people leave trails. Digging into Premier's business model, I found out they got a 30% cut of every fine they collected. Illegal as hell under Texas consumer laws. I laid it out for Diana. They're running a racket with legal paperwork. Diana, eyes sharp, called someone. That afternoon, crisp military tone. "Yes, sir. RICO predicate offenses. Documentation ready for federal review." When she hung up, she just smiled like she knew Premier had stepped in quicksand. 3 days later, Premier's regional manager called our house. I put him on speaker. Diana listened poker-faced. "Mr. Delqua, we'd like to resolve confusion over recent citations. Your property actually exceeds standards. We'll waive all pending fees and reconsider our contract. That's generous. What changed your mind?" We received important clarification from higher regulatory authorities. After he hung up, I stared at Diana. Care to explain? She just said, "Sometimes bullies need reminders about the law." But Bethany wasn't finished. Next, she called an emergency city council meeting armed with a PowerPoint and evidence of criminal activity at our house. Photos of my patrol car, Diana's unmarked sedan, a black SUV with government plates. "Classic drug distribution patterns," she announced. Diana sat still as marble. But when Bethany zoomed in on Diana's uniform, focusing on her shoulder insignia, Diana stood up. "Those vehicles belong to my colleagues from the State Police Criminal Investigation Division," she said, voice slicing through the room. "We carpool. You're documenting our coffee breaks, not crimes." Bethany's face drained faster than a bathtub with no stopper. You could hear her ego shrivel, but she kept going. 2 weeks later, after my worst shift, yet meth lab high-speed chase disaster, I found Diana pale and stone-faced. Bethany called 911. "Claimed you threatened her with your service weapon yesterday." My stomach dropped. I'd been at work the whole day. There were witnesses, cam footage, everything. But false reports don't just vanish. They haunt you. Worse, Bethany had hired Bradford Ashworth, infamous ambulance chaser, threatening federal lawsuits. Diana's phone buzzed. Her posture changed, calculating, dangerous. She stepped out to call someone, came back with that glint in her eyes. "Marcus, time to document everything. And we need to talk about my work." Just then, our bell rang, Detective Ray Gonzalez, Internal Affairs folder in hand. Diana joined us. "Detective, I've documented a systematic harassment campaign crossing jurisdictional lines. Mrs. Thornfield's false report, selective enforcement coordination with officials, this goes federal." Ray left looking like he'd just been run over by a freight train of bureaucracy. After he left, Diana turned to me. Marcus, it's time you learned who you really married. She disappeared into the closet, emerged with a mahogany box full of medals, Bronze Star Service medals, certificates with gold seals. Lieutenant Colonel Diana Michelle Delacroix, U.S. Army, retired, she said, sliding her ID across the table. Current assignment: Division Commander, Texas State Police, Criminal Investigation Division. Turns out my wife wasn't just the best thing that ever happened to me. She outranked everyone I'd ever worked with. She'd been documenting Bethany's campaign, connecting with the FBI, IRS, DOJ. What I thought was small-town drama was actually a full-on civil rights investigation. Bethany wasn't just a bully, she was running systematic campaigns against anyone who didn't fit her idea of acceptable. Families of color, the elderly immigrants, she'd gone after them all, hiding it behind HOA paperwork. Diana's team FBI state. Investigators' cybercrimes rolled into our house with laptops and binders unraveling Premier's fraud, racketeering, tax evasion. The whole thing was coordinated financial terrorism using paperwork instead of baseball bats. And Diana, she was the spider in the center of the web, calm, methodical, lethal. The week before the final HOA meeting, Bethany's desperation hit fever pitch. We caught her on camera spray painting corrupt cop on my truck, felony vandalism, evidence in glorious 4K. Premier's execs panicked, called us begging to drop everything, offering refunds. We said we'd see them in court. Bethany tried one last move, another city council meeting, PowerPoint in hand, claiming deep state infiltration with photos of every federal car in our driveway, full-blown conspiracy theories. She ended by demanding a full investigation of the Delqua organized crime syndicate. Diana stood up, walked to the front, and calmly introduced herself. Lieutenant Colonel, Head of State Police Criminal Investigations. She called on Agent Ellis, who arrested Bethany on the spot for civil rights violations. Cameras flashed, neighbors cheered, and Mrs. Patterson's laugh rang out like a bell. 6 months later, Willowbrook was transformed. Bethany pled guilty, 18 months in federal prison, 3 years probation, full restitution. Her BMW got repossessed. Premier Community Solutions dissolved their assets, paying back every family. Randall, the code enforcer, lost his job, his pension, and his freedom, 12 months for corruption. Nearly 300 citations were thrown out, and the money funded a new playground and a Unity Day festival in Mrs. Patterson's rose garden. But the real victory: our neighborhood started healing. Barbecues in our backyard, kids of every color playing together. New HOA rules, full transparency, unanimous votes for big changes, real protections. Diana founded a state initiative to teach other police departments how to spot and stop HOA abuse. Her case now a national model for justice. And I got promoted to sergeant. Now I help other families survive what we did. Our marriage stronger than ever. And Diana's garden feeds twice as many people now that every inch is safe from petty tyrants. As the sun sets over Willowbrook, I look around and realize sometimes the best revenge isn't getting, even it's building a life so good the bully could never even imagine it. So tell me, where's the line between protecting a community and abusing power? When does a neighbor become a tyrant? Have you ever faced an HOA nightmare or fought back against small-town corruption? Drop your stories and thoughts below. Let's help others fight back, one lesson at a time. And hey, don't forget to subscribe, because next week we're tackling landlords who try to evict veterans over service dogs. You won't want to miss watching justice get served Texas style.